I still remember that Thursday night perfectly. It was 8:30 in the evening. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a fast food place just down the street from the warehouse. I had just finished my fourth 12-hour shift in a row. My hands were numb. My lower back was screaming. I looked down at the $12 double cheeseburger in my lap. I was eating it because I was physically too exhausted to go home and stand in front of a stove. I was a warehouse logistics supervisor earning a base salary of $55,000 a year. Whenever they offered overtime, I took it. I thought I was getting ahead. My overtime rate was $28.84 an hour. What I did not know at the time was that when I sat down and did the forensic accounting on my own life, I was taking home less than $5 an hour in real spendable wealth for those extra hours. My name is Marcus, and I spend way too much time obsessing over the invisible math of the American workday. If you are someone who feels like you are trading all of your time for money but still falling behind, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because today, I am not talking about hustle culture or how to grind your way to wealth. I want to talk about the mathematical illusion of time and a half, and how the system is perfectly designed to make you poorer the harder you work. And I know it because I have been exactly where you are standing right now. I believed the lie for years. I used to look at my pay stub and see those extra gross income numbers. I would see an extra $400 on the gross line and feel a rush of pride. I told myself I was outworking everyone else. I was the guy who always said yes to the Saturday shift. I thought I was building a safety net, but I was never actually getting ahead. Every month, my bank account hovered around the exact same number. I was working 60 hours a week, but my savings account looked like I was working 30. I blamed inflation. I blamed gas prices. I blamed the cost of groceries. I blamed everything except the one thing that was actually draining my wealth: the extra hours themselves. I did not understand that working more was triggering a cascade of hidden costs. I thought 1 hour of work equaled 1 hour of pay. That is how we are all taught to think about jobs. But human beings are not machines. We require maintenance. We require rest. When you stretch a human being past 40 hours a week, the maintenance costs skyrocket. I did not see the taxes eating the top layer of that extra money. I did not see the exhaustion tax eating the middle layer. I did not see the physical wear and tear eating the foundation. When I first started calculating this, I thought I was just uniquely bad with money. I thought I was doing something wrong. Then I found a report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics from 2023 showing that the average worker who pushes past 50 hours a week experiences a sharp decline in their effective hourly take-home pay. I read that twice. The more hours you give them, the less each hour is actually worth to you. The math was completely inverted. I had been trading my most valuable asset, my time, for diminishing returns. Every time I clocked in for a weekend shift, I thought I was buying my future freedom. But the numbers were telling a completely different story. The system relies on you looking only at the gross pay. They need you to feel proud of the hustle. And when I finally understood how the trap actually worked, I realized why the company was so happy to let me work myself to death. I did not have a name for it back then. I just knew I was tired all the time and my bank account was completely stagnant. When I finally went looking for answers, I found out it was called the overtime illusion. I did not know it had a name until I started really digging into this. One night, I came across a 2024 labor economics working paper. The researchers were studying the real hourly wage decay of extended work weeks. They tracked workers across thousands of overtime shifts to see what actually happens to $1 of extra pay. They measured what happens to your money when your body crosses the 40-hour threshold. I sat at my kitchen table with a printed copy of the study and read every single page. The math they showed completely broke my understanding of hard work. I want to walk you through exactly how layer 1 of this trap caught me. At first, I only saw this part, and I thought I understood it. My official overtime rate was $28.84 an hour. I used to look at that number and feel rich. I thought I had found a cheat code for wealth. I used to think that working 50% more hours meant my bank account would grow 50% faster. Then I found a study from the Institute for Labor Economics in 2021. The data showed that working beyond 50 hours a week yields a 0% increase in actual wealth retention for the average worker over a 5-year period. I read that twice. People working 55 to 60 hours a week were retaining the exact same amount of wealth as people working a standard 40-hour week. The extra money was completely vaporizing. They were working themselves into the ground for literally zero long-term financial gain. Let me show you how it happened to me in real numbers. If I worked 20 hours of overtime in a single 2-week pay period, that was $576.80 of extra gross income. I would mentally spend that money before payday even arrived. I would plan to put $200 toward my credit card debt. I would plan to put the rest in my savings account. But then Friday would come. I would log into my banking app while sitting in the warehouse break room. The extra deposit was never $576. It was always closer to $380. Almost $200 had vanished before the money ever reached my hands. I used to think that taxes were just a flat penalty across all my income. Then I found a report from the Tax Foundation in 2023. The report showed that payroll software often assumes your overtime spike is your new permanent salary. It projects that inflated number across the entire year and withholds taxes at a much higher marginal bracket for that specific check. The government was taking a premium cut of my premium time. I was sacrificing my weekends to earn time and a half. But after the extra withholdings, I was only keeping time and a quarter. I complained about it to my coworkers. We all did, but I kept signing up for the shifts anyway. I told myself that $380 extra was still good money. I told myself I was still winning the game. I was giving up my Saturday mornings and my Thursday evenings for a number on a screen that was lying to me. But that missing $200 from payroll was just the surface of the illusion. The real financial bleeding had not even started yet. Let me walk you through the exact math of layer 1. At first I only saw this part, and I thought I understood it. My base pay at the warehouse was $19.22 an hour. If I worked a standard 2-week pay period, that was 80 hours. My gross pay before any deductions was $1,537. But I never worked, just 80 hours. I always picked up the extra shifts. Let us look at a pay period where I worked 20 extra hours. My overtime rate was $28.84. 20 hours of overtime added $576.80 to my gross pay. My total gross check was now $2,114. If you multiply that check by 26 pay periods, you get $54,900 a year. That was my $55,000 salary. That was the number I bragged about. But here's what the math actually looked like on payday. Payroll software does not look at your yearly average. It looks at the check in front of it. Because that check was $2,114, the system assumed I made that much every single time. It assumed my annual income had permanently jumped. So it applied a higher marginal tax withholding rate to the entire check. Federal taxes took a massive bite out of that specific overtime money. State taxes took another slice. Then the flat taxes hit. Social Security and Medicare took exactly 7.65%. Then came the voluntary percentage deductions. I contributed 5% to my workplace retirement plan. Because my gross pay went up, the dollar amount taken out for retirement went up too. Out of that $576 of overtime, I lost almost $200 immediately. My actual net pay for those 20 hours of extra work was $374. Divide $374 by 20 hours. My actual take-home pay for my overtime was $18.70 an hour. I want you to really hear that number. My gross base pay was $19.22. My net overtime pay was $18.70. I was taking home less cash per hour during overtime than my base rate was worth on paper. I used to think that the time and a half premium meant I was making huge money. Then I found a 2022 analysis from the Economic Policy Institute. They found that millions of hourly workers lose roughly 30 to 40% of their overtime premium directly to marginal withholdings and automated deductions. Millions of us are sacrificing our hardest hours for a fraction of what we think we are earning. I was giving up my Saturday mornings. I was missing dinners with my family. I was doing the heaviest lifting of the week when my body was already exhausted. And I was doing it for $18.70 an hour in my pocket. I used to stare at my pay stub and feel a knot in my stomach. I knew I was working harder than ever, but the math was not translating to freedom. I was trapped in layer 1. I was working 50% more hours for a 30% increase in net pay. It was a bad trade, but I could still rationalize it. I told myself that $18 an hour was better than $0 an hour. I told myself that I was still putting extra money in the bank. But when I dug deeper, I found something that most people never notice. I was about to discover that those 20 extra hours were triggering a hidden financial avalanche, and it was completely wiping out that $374. But when I dug deeper, I found something that most people never notice. I call it the exhaustion tax. I had $374 of extra net pay from my 20 hours of overtime. I thought that money was mine to keep. But working 60 hours a week fundamentally changes how you live. When you give all your energy to a warehouse, you have zero energy left for your own life. Let me show you exactly where that $374 went. I worked a 12-hour shift on Thursday. When I clocked out at 8 in the evening, my legs were numb and my back was completely stiff. The idea of driving home, standing in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, and cooking a cheap, healthy meal felt impossible. So I sat in my car and bought a $12 double cheeseburger. I did that 3 times during an overtime week. That was $36 spent on takeout, simply because I was too tired to cook. Then there was the caffeine. You do not work a 60-hour physical job on 8 hours of sleep and tap water. I was buying 2 energy drinks a day from the break room vending machine. At $3 each, that was $6 a day. Over a 6-day work week, that was $36 just to keep my eyes open and my arms moving. Then came the weekend chores. Because I was working Saturday, my entire personal life was compressed into a single day. I used to mow my own lawn and do my own laundry on Saturday mornings. But when Sunday was my only day to recover, I refused to spend it doing heavy chores. I paid a neighborhood kid $40 to mow my small yard. I paid $20 to drop my clothes at the wash and fold service down the street. Let us add up the exhaustion tax for a single week. $36 for convenience food, $36 for liquid energy, $60 to outsource my basic chores. That is $132 a week. Over the 2-week pay period, that is $264 completely gone. I was spending that money purely to sustain the overtime schedule. I used to think I was just lazy or bad at meal prepping. Then, I found a study from the American Psychological Association in 2023. They found that workers clocking over 50 hours a week spend an average of 45% more on convenience food and outsourced household tasks than standard-hour workers. I read those numbers and felt sick. I was paying a premium just to survive my own work schedule. It was a closed loop. I was working extra hours to make extra money, and then spending that extra money to recover from the extra hours. Let us do the real math on my paycheck now. I started with $374 of extra net pay. Subtract the $264 of exhaustion tax. I was left with exactly $110. I gave up 20 hours of my life. I missed 2 Saturdays with my friends. I pushed my body to the absolute limit. Divide $110 by 20 hours. My real take-home pay for my overtime was $5.50 an hour. I was running on a treadmill that was slowly catching on fire. I was literally working for $5.50 an hour, manic, and I was thanking my boss for the opportunity. But the trap was not fully closed yet, because $5.50 an hour was actually the optimistic number. I had not even looked at the physical toll the warehouse was quietly extracting from my future. And this is the part that took me years to figure out. The part nobody tells you. I was already down to $5.50 an hour in real value. But I was only measuring the money leaving my wallet right then. I was not measuring the silent theft happening in the background over years. When you work an extra shift, your car does not work for free. I drove a 10-year-old sedan. My commute was 15 miles each way. To work those 20 extra hours a pay period, I had to make 2 extra round trips to the warehouse on the weekends. That was 60 extra miles of driving every 2 weeks. I ran the numbers on my gas, oil changes, and tire replacements. Those extra trips were costing me exactly $17.60 a pay period in pure vehicle depreciation and fuel. So I took my $110 of remaining profit and subtracted $17.60. I was down to $92.40. Then came the physical toll of the warehouse floor. I was 34 years old, lifting heavy boxes on concrete for 60 hours a week. I was living on ibuprofen. I was buying icy hot patches for my lower back. I spent exactly $10 every 2 weeks just on pharmacy items to keep my joints functioning. Subtract that $10. I was left with exactly $82.40 of actual spendable wealth for 20 hours of extra labor. Divide $82.40 by 20 hours. There's the final number. My official overtime rate was $28.84. My actual net wealth creation was $4.12 an hour. I want you to let that sink in. I was doing the hardest, most exhausting labor of my entire week for $4.12 an hour. I could not even buy a fast food meal with 1 hour of my premium time. But the horror of layer 3 is not just about the $4.12. It is about what happens when you repeat that math over a decade. I used to think my body was invincible. I thought I could just sleep hard on Sunday and reset the biological clock. Then I found a 2021 global study from the World Health Organization. They tracked workers doing 55 or more hours a week and found a massive increase in stroke and heart disease. But more importantly for physical workers like me, they found a severe spike in permanent musculoskeletal damage. The study showed that chronic overtime physically ages your body faster, forcing people out of the workforce an average of 3 to 5 years earlier than standard-hour workers. I had never thought about the end of my career. I was only looking at next Friday. If I worked 60 hours a week for the next 10 years, I might earn an extra $50,000 in tiny increments. But if my back gave out at age 55 instead of 60, I would lose 5 full years of my prime earning salary. 5 years at $55,000 a year is $275,000. I was trading $275,000 of future wealth for $4.12 an hour today. I was quite literally paying my company for the privilege of destroying my own knees and shoulders. And then there was the sleep debt. I was running on 6 hours of sleep a night. My immune system was constantly suppressed. Every winter I would catch a severe flu that would knock me out for 4 days. Because I was hourly, I had to burn my paid time off just to lay in bed with a fever. I was losing my vacation time to illness caused by sheer exhaustion. I was mortgaging my physical future for a completely fabricated present. I sat at my kitchen table looking at that final number on the paper, $82.40 for 20 hours of my one and only life. I felt a cold panic wash over me, because I realized I was not just broke, I was actively engineering my own poverty, shift by extra shift, and my body was keeping the score. I sat there staring at that $82.40 on my notepad. I wanted to see exactly how much this trap was going to cost me before I died. So, I opened a blank spreadsheet on my phone right there in the car. I built 2 different versions of my life side by side. The first column was the path I was already on. The overtime path. Let us say I kept grinding out 20 hours of overtime every 2 weeks for my entire career. I am taking home $82.40 of actual wealth per pay period. There are 26 pay periods in a year. That means my 60-hour work weeks were generating exactly $2,142 of real profit a year. Over 10 years, that extra labor builds a pile of $21,420. Over 30 years, it grows to roughly $64,000. I looked at that number and tried to feel good about it. $64,000 sounds like a solid safety net, but then I had to factor in the physical toll from layer 3. Because of the permanent joint damage and exhaustion, the statistics showed I would likely be forced into early retirement at age 60 instead of 65. My base salary was $55,000 a year. Losing those last 5 working years means I am forfeiting $275,000 of base income. I took my $64,000 of lifetime overtime profit. I subtracted the $275,000 of lost future salary. By choosing the overtime path, my lifetime net worth was actually negative $211,000. I was literally working myself into a $250,000 hole. Then I looked at the second column, the standard path. What if I just worked my 40 hours and went home? My gross income drops back down to my base salary. I do not get the rush of a big paycheck, but I also stop paying the exhaustion tax. I start cooking my own meals because I actually have the energy to stand in my kitchen. I stop buying overpriced energy drinks because I'm sleeping 8 hours a night. I stop outsourcing my weekend chores. That immediately keeps $264 in my pocket every 2 weeks. Over a year, that is $6,864 of my own money that stays mine. If I take that retained money and put it into a basic index fund, returning 8% a year, the math explodes. I am investing roughly $570 a month. Over 30 years, that money grows to $849,000. And because I am not destroying my spine on the warehouse floor, I can work comfortably until age 65. I collect my full $55,000 salary for those final 5 years. I keep that $275,000. I looked at the two columns side by side on my glowing screen. On the left, the overtime path. 30 years of missing Saturdays. 30 years of eating cold fast food in my car. 30 years of joint pain and sleep deprivation, and a net loss of over $200,000 because my body quit early. On the right, the 40-hour path. 30 years of resting on the weekends. 30 years of sleeping 8 hours a night. And a net worth approaching $1 million simply because I stopped bleeding money to survive my own job. The gap between the two lives was massive. The math was completely undeniable. I was paying a fortune for the privilege of working myself to death. I felt a deep sickness in my stomach. That was when I finally understood why I kept getting stuck, even when the math was right in front of me. If the math was so obvious, why did I keep destroying myself? I sat in my car looking at the $200,000 gap between those two lives, and I felt completely paralyzed. I had the right answer in front of me. Just stop working the overtime. But the thought of giving up those extra shifts made my chest tight with panic. That was when I finally understood why I kept getting stuck, even when I knew the right answer. I had to look in the mirror and admit something incredibly uncomfortable. I was not working for the money anymore. I was working for the feeling. I was addicted to the gross income number on the screen. I used to think my work ethic was my greatest asset. Then I found a psychology paper from 2019 about something called action bias and financial scarcity. The researchers found that when human beings feel financially stressed, our brains demand immediate, visible action. Working extra hours feels like a direct attack on your poverty. It feels productive. Resting, cooking a meal, or budgeting feels passive. It feels like giving up. I was using physical exhaustion to medicate my financial anxiety. If I was exhausted, I could tell myself I was doing everything possible to get ahead. And the system is perfectly designed to exploit that exact psychological vulnerability. The warehouse management understood this better than anyone. They did not just offer overtime. They weaponized our pride. They gamified our survival instinct. We had a massive whiteboard in the main break room. It was called the weekly hustle board. Every Monday, the shift supervisors would write the names of the top 5 overtime earners from the previous week in bright red marker. I was almost always in the top 3. Every Friday morning, our floor manager would walk down the aisles during the heaviest part of the shift. He would stop at my station, point at me in front of the younger guys, and tell them to be more like Marcus. He would literally say, "Marcus is a machine. He never stops." I would puff out my chest. I felt like the absolute alpha of the warehouse floor. I felt respected. I felt indispensable. But when I finally ran the numbers, I realized how thoroughly I had been played. Do you know how much that compliment cost the company? $0.00. Do you know how much putting my name on a whiteboard cost them? Nothing. They were buying my Saturday mornings with a pat on the back. They were purchasing my spinal health with cheap corporate validation. They knew exactly what they were doing. If they actually valued my time, they would have raised my base pay of $19.22. But raising my base pay costs them real money on every single hour I work. Offering me overtime at a heavily taxed premium, while my own lifestyle costs ate the difference, was the cheapest way to extract maximum labor from my body. They gave me a fake badge of honor, and I thanked them for it. I confused exhaustion with progress. I confused being busy with becoming wealthy. The entire industrial system relies on that confusion. They need you to feel proud of your 60-hour week. So you never have the energy to sit down and do the math on your own life. Because the moment you do the math, you stop playing their game. I stared at that spreadsheet and knew I had to stop taking the shifts immediately. But a massive wave of fear hit me. Let me say out loud the objection that is forming in your head right now. Because it used to form in mine every single time I tried to break free. When I first looked at this math, my immediate reaction was panic, followed by an intense defense of my own choices. Let me say out loud the objection that is forming in your head right now, because it used to form in mine. I thought to myself, this sounds great for a spreadsheet, but you do not know my life. I need that extra $374 just to keep my head above water. If I stop working Saturdays, my car payment will bounce, and my lights will get shut off. I know this sounds unrealistic. I pushed back against this idea for years. I told myself I could just beat the exhaustion tax with pure discipline. I promised myself I would just meal prep on Sunday mornings and stop buying the $12 burgers. I swore I would stop buying the energy drinks and just drink black coffee from home. But human biology does not negotiate with your willpower. You cannot outsmart profound physical exhaustion. When your body is broken, your brain will always choose the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance always costs money. The counterintuitive truth that finally broke my stubbornness was terrifying. I had to accept that working less was the only way to force true financial efficiency. When you step down from 60 hours to 40 hours, your gross pay drops instantly. That is the scary part. That is the part that keeps everyone trapped. But your baseline survival costs drop even faster. That is the hidden reality. I was terrified to lose that $576 of gross overtime pay. But when I finally stopped working the extra shifts, I realized something shocking. I did not actually need that extra money to survive. I only needed that extra money to survive the 60-hour work week itself. It was a completely artificial emergency. Once I was only working 40 hours, I suddenly had the time to drive to the cheaper grocery store across town instead of the expensive convenience store by the warehouse. I had the energy to stand in my kitchen and cook chicken and rice in bulk on a Sunday afternoon. I had the mental clarity to sit down on a Tuesday night, review my bank statements, and call my car insurance company to negotiate my rate down by $40 a month. When you are working 60 hours of physical labor, you do not have the mental bandwidth to optimize your life. You just swipe your debit card to make immediate problems go away. You pay a premium on everything because convenience is the only thing keeping you sane. Working 40 hours gave me back my mind. And a clear mind is the most powerful wealth-building tool in the world. It allowed me to stop trying to outwork my bad spending habits and actually fix the massive leaks in my financial boat. The transition was not easy. My coworkers told me I was crazy. My manager told me I was leaving free money on the table. The first 2 weeks of seeing a smaller paycheck were completely terrifying. But I had a concrete plan. And if you are ready to get off the warehouse floor and take your life back, here are the exact steps I took to escape the illusion forever. Leaving the overtime treadmill was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. The financial panic was real, but the math was my anchor. The first thing I did was calculate my true hourly net rate. I sat down at my kitchen table with my last 3 months of bank statements and my pay stubs. I went line by line. I highlighted every single purchase I made purely because I was too exhausted from working 60 hours. I tallied up the fast food, the vending machine energy drinks, and the outsourced chores. I calculated the extra gas for my car. I subtracted the steep marginal taxes from my gross overtime pay. Then I calculated my real hourly take-home pay for those extra shifts. My number was $4.12 an hour. I took a thick black marker, wrote that number on a piece of paper, and taped it to my car dashboard. Every time my phone buzzed with an overtime request, I looked at that piece of paper. You have to find your exact number. You cannot fight an illusion until you put a real price tag on it. The second step I took was drawing a hard boundary around my 40 hours. I walked up to my floor manager on a Wednesday afternoon. I told him I was no longer available for the weekend shifts. He looked at me like I had lost my mind. He told me my name was going to drop off the weekly hustle board. He warned me I was leaving free money on the table. I just nodded, turned around, and went back to work. That Friday at 5 o'clock, I clocked out. I walked to my car and drove home. It felt incredibly strange. I was so used to being at the warehouse that having a Friday night to myself felt almost illegal, but I still had to prove the math worked in real life. That weekend, I reclaimed my 20 hours. I did not pay the neighborhood kid $40 to cut the grass. I did it myself on Saturday morning. I did not pay $20 for the wash and fold service. I did my own laundry. On Sunday morning, I drove out to the cheaper grocery store across town. I spent $50 on bulk chicken, brown rice, and frozen vegetables. I spent 2 hours cooking my lunches and dinners for the entire week. By Monday morning, I had already blocked over $130 from leaving my checking account. I used to think budgeting was just about restriction. Then I found a 2022 survey from the National Bureau of Economic Research. It showed that workers who reduced their work week back to standard hours increased their personal savings rate by an average of 12% within 6 months, purely through the financial efficiency of recovered time. Over my first 2-week pay period without overtime, I kept $264 of my own money that usually vanished to the exhaustion tax. The first sign of escape was not a massive paycheck. It was the complete absence of financial bleeding. My gross pay was lower, but my bank account balance was actually stabilizing. I was finally off the treadmill. But simply surviving on 40 hours was not the end goal. I needed to actually grow my wealth, and I had just bought back a massive chunk of my life to make that happen. I had stabilized my bank account, but saving money on groceries was not going to make me rich. The third thing I changed was how I invested my 20 recovered hours. I knew I could not stay at a base rate of $19.22 an hour forever. But instead of trying to raise my income by working more hours, I decided to raise the value of my base hour. I took 10 of those 20 hours I used to spend moving boxes on the weekends. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I made myself. I used that time to study for a certified supply chain professional credential. I spent $400 on the exam and the study materials. It was hard work, but it was a different kind of hard work. My brain was tired, but my back was resting. It took me exactly 6 months to pass the exam. I walked into the regional director office with my new certification. I did not ask for my overtime back. I applied for the open logistics planner position. 2 weeks later, I got the job. My base salary jumped from $55,000 a year to $75,000 a year. My new base hourly rate was $36.05. Let us look at the lifetime math of that single decision. When I was working 60 hours a week on the warehouse floor, I was killing myself to gross roughly $55,000 a year. Now I was grossing $75,000 a year, and I was only working 40 hours. I was making $20,000 more every single year, and I had my entire weekend back. Over 30 years, that is $600,000 of additional base income. And because I was sitting at a desk planning shipping routes, instead of destroying my knees on the concrete, I secured my ability to work comfortably until I am 65. I kept my health, I kept my weekends, and I built actual wealth. All because I stopped working for $4.12 an hour. There is a profound difference between working hard and being exploited by your own work ethic. I used to think that giving up my Saturdays made me a tough guy. What I did not know at the time was that I was just making my employer richer while funding my own physical destruction. Corporations will always take as much time as you are willing to give them. They will put your name on a whiteboard and tell you that you are a machine. But your body keeps a perfect ledger. You cannot out-hustle bad math. You cannot build a fortune by selling your premium time at a massive discount and then buying your own survival at a premium. Your time is the only genuine asset you have in this world. You cannot earn more of it. You can only choose how you price it. If this video helped you see your finances differently, I want you to hit that like button and subscribe. Every video I make is something I wish someone had told me years earlier. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.